best way to make no progress is to get injured. Injuries suck, we all know that, and one of the most common ones with bodyweight training, handstands in particular, is the wrists. Here's what you can do. The wrists aren't exactly supposed to be stood on, but we're at the point now in human evolution where we can dedicate a significant amount of time to trying to figure this one out, which can then lead to some issues, especially with that sudden increase in load. But I wanted to share with you a few ways in which we can manage this so that we can still work towards our goals without causing any long-term issues. A quick asterisk here, I'm talking specifically about overuse injuries, not necessarily if you've broken or fractured your wrist. As with anything, don't take advice from a random bloke off the internet. Go and see a medical professional and get your own individual circumstance looked at so the advice can be tailored to you. Be smart. First of all, let's get frequency right. A lot of people do too much too soon when it comes to handstands, and usually out of good intention. You're eager to make progress and you want to train, but going from 0 to 100 is usually where issues happen with injuries. The handstand is a neurological skill. It benefits from high frequency. Joints, much like the musculoskeletal system, does adapt to loading over time. It just takes longer for these areas to adapt. If we're going from sitting behind a computer to standing on our hands 7 days a week, there may be some issues. So very simply, the easiest way to go about this is if you are experiencing some soreness, is just to reduce the frequency that you're training. Maybe going from 7 days a week to just every other day. That little bit extra in terms of recovery might be enough to reduce the symptoms, but it still allow you to keep working on your goals, whilst building up some capacity and resistance. We don't necessarily want to rest completely, because although this can help relieve some symptoms, it also is going to lead to a decrease in capacity. When you return back to the activity that you're doing, this can quickly exceed your capacity, and then you get injured again. And then the cycle repeats itself, taking rest, getting re-injured, and things don't get any better. Simply reduce the frequency back to a point you can handle, and then build back over the coming weeks and months. Second is adjusting the loading position. Because when we're doing handstands on the floor, our wrist is probably in the most intense position. We've got a large amount of extension that is required, but not only that, we need to be able to perform and contract in this position and take the torque of balancing a handstand. Simply by changing the orientation and the position in which our hands are can reduce the intensity and make it easier to manage around an injury. Blocks are a great option here because it's very much the same position as the floor, but it allows the fingers to bend, so it reduces the requirement of wrist extension. This one will take a little bit of changing to understand how to balance, but probably for the better. If you don't have blocks, you can perform this with any edge where your fingers hang over the edge. It's essentially the same thing, but blocks are a worthy investment if you want to take your handstands to those higher levels. You can get blocks that are sloped or simply perform handstands on a sloped surface, and that's also going to reduce the requirement for wrist extension. However, this is slightly different to balance, so I'm not necessarily a fan of this, but it is an option. It's worth trying out and see how you get on with it. Lastly, I would consider your shoulder flexibility as well. If you have closed shoulders, it's going to force them to go forward, and it's going to require more wrist extension and put more force through the wrist. So make sure you're working on opening your shoulders as well to help reduce the strain given. I'll link to a video on that one in the description down below. Parallettes are another great option because it removes the requirement for extension completely. It actually puts the wrist in a more neutral position. You do use a different method of correction through ulnar and radial deviation as opposed to this extension flexion that you'd use in a normal handstand, but it's still useful because it means we can get time in the handstand and time working towards the goals without annoying that injury any further. Finally, wrist conditioning. As Anna Meakin says, you can't go wrong with getting strong, and much like any body part or focus, the wrists need conditioning and need to be strengthening, especially in those earlier stages. Now, to make this simple, there's 3 movements in particular that I like and I'm a big fan of, and I would use these as a warm-up and potentially performing a couple of sets at the end of a session as a cool down, just to help solidify and strengthen those wrists and increase the capacity that they can handle. These 3 movements are the wrist push-up, the wrist curl-up, and the wrist rock. Performing these movements for 10 to 20 reps works great. If you want more details on this, then I've got an entire video on a strong wrist routine that I'll link down below. So hopefully, regardless of where your wrists are at, these options give you something rather than nothing that you can do to continue to work towards your goals, whether that's from just basic conditioning to exercise modifications, or finally a full return to sport, doing the handstand, doing the thing that you were doing beforehand. As always, if you found this video helpful, you can hit that thumbs up button and support the channel. Right next to it is that subscribe button if you're enjoying the Bodyweight Warrior tribe. But other than that, Have a strong week. Peace.